Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and today's review is the SPL Phonitor X headphone amplifier. This is or prices on the web right now for this seem to range between about $2,850 and $3,300 US from various websites. I will link to a couple where you can buy those down below. This was loaned to me by a friend of the channel. I have no affiliation with SPL, so all of the opinions you're about to hear are mine and mine alone. So with that, let's do shameless self-promotion, and then we will come back and get into the review. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button, and if you haven't, please subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon set up so that you can help support me on a monthly basis, and I've set up a PayPal donation so that you can help me out in that way too if a monthly subscription does not make sense for you. Links for all of that, including the benefits, in the description below. Please check those out. All right, on with the show. All right, the SPL Phonitor X headphone amp. All right, let's talk specs real quick. So the power output ratings here are interesting. They definitely vary with the kind of load that you put this on. So from the balanced headphone output on this thing, SPL claims that at 32 ohms, there are 0.7 watts per channel output. At 300 ohms, there is 3.5 watts per channel power output, and at 600 ohms, there is 8 watts per channel of output. So some interesting things going on with the power supply in there to get those kinds of numbers. And I took those numbers directly off of SPL's website for this product, and so I will link to that in the description below as well, so you can verify that. All right, it's a fairly heavy unit coming in at 9.7 pounds or 4.4 kilograms on there, but I mean, it's not back-breaking or anything like that. The weight balance, like, I think the transformer, the power supply is over on this side, which makes sense because the power plug is as well. Okay, and so, I mean, it feels a little unbalanced. I mean, of course, that only matters when you hold it. Once it's on your desk, it doesn't make any difference how the weight is distributed there. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into the build of this thing. Like we have for a headphone amp these days, a fairly busy looking front panel. Okay, we've got an Alps RK47 potentiometer here on this volume knob. We have 6.35 millimeter single-ended headphone output here. We have 4-pin balanced XLR headphone output. We have power switch here. And then we have these pretty cool like VU meters going on here. And it's fun to watch these needles in here bounce around as you play music. So that's just an interesting feature aesthetically in here, and to watch on this product. That is, like, it is interesting and a neat aesthetic thing here. Then we also have some fun stuff on this one. Like we can switch here between using the, what is this called? The channel balance selector. So like, do you want it stereo, mono, or do you want to be able to balance the channels out a little bit? That's what this is here for. Okay, sorry if I bumped the mic with that. We have output, whether you want to use this as a speaker preamplifier, which you can do if you want to mute it, or use the headphone amp. We have a crossfeed circuit here with 1, 2, 3, 4 different settings, and then that's switchable on and off. All right, and then well, we have more crossfeed settings here as well, like how much you want to use it, like that's in, and then we have source select. And if you get this with a built-in DAC, which you can do, there is the input selector here for that. Now, this unit does not have the built-in DAC, so I'm evaluating this as a headphone amp only. All right, so real quick, just like, what does crossfeed mean? If you're unfamiliar with that, what crossfeed does is it crossfeeds, right? It takes a portion of the output of each channel and mixes it into the other. The intent there is to create a more speaker-like, from headphones anyway, a more speaker-like presentation spatially. And the reason for that is, like, when you listen to speakers in a room, both ears hear both speakers. Like if you have the, like to my right here, the right channel speaker, the sound from that speaker reaches your right ear first, but then it also reaches the left ear. Headphones, because they fit over your ears like this, are a little bit different, where if you have something that is hard panned to the right, it will only go into your right ear and never reach to your left ear, and the same is true on the other side if it goes the other way. That can feel uncomfortable if you've ever heard that before, where you only have sound coming in right there on one side, as it kind of creates this odd pressure on your ear. So what Crossfeed does is it mixes the signals just a little bit to try to simulate a speaker-like presentation where you hear in both ears. It's trying to replicate both the time delay and the pitch change, the lower pitch sound of the off ear, so to speak. Okay, that way, just to kind of to try to create a more speaker-like presentation. And then this unit has several different settings for the level to which you want that to happen. Does it work? I will comment on that when we get to the sound here in just a moment. All right, continuing with the tour of the unit, like we have this aluminum casing here. The front panel I think is mostly, well, that actually is a kind of a brushed aluminum. There are different color faces plates for this unit available as well. But then we have this aluminum casing here, and then let's look at the back panel to see what we have going on there. Okay, power input. We have a 12-volt trigger in-out thing, which is connected to SPL power amp. So it sounds like that's probably something you want to use with fellow SPL products there. Then we have the preamp outputs, both unbalanced RCA and balanced 3-pin XLR outputs. And then we have the inputs, okay, from the DAC here, both single-ended RCA and balanced dual 3-pin XLR there on the back panel. All right, so that's the build. It's a fairly well-built unit. It has a little bit of heft to it. It's not terrible. I'm not going to hold it up the entire time here. But it's fairly well put together. The potentiometer has great resistance to it. All of the switches and the knobs on the front have a nice satisfying click to them. So it's a well-built, well-made unit, all right, in my opinion there. Okay, so let's get into the meat of it, and that is the sound. All right, test gear. I have had this thing around for a while, so it has had a bunch of different headphones plugged into it. And for this list, I am going to kind of break it out into the headphone types that were plugged in here. So let's start with the low impedance dynamic driver headphones that I tried on this. My Fostex TH900 with the Lawton Purple Heart chambers and Focal Radiance. All right, high impedance dynamics are the Mastrop plus Sennheiser HD6XX, which is 300 ohms. The Beyerdynamic DT880 600 ohm, which I have balanced, modded, and plugged into the balanced output of this thing. And then the ZMF Atrium, which is also 300 ohms. All right, a couple of easy to drive planar magnetic headphones. I had this for a bit when the Audeze MM500 was in, so I tried that one. And then the HiFiMan HE1000 SE, which I just reviewed. By the way, links to reviews of all of these headphones will be in the description below. Sort of a middle-of-the-road driving planar magnetic headphone. So not super difficult, not super easy, would be the HiFiMan HE1000 V2. And then a couple of really hard-to-drive planar magnetics. One would be the Dan Clark Audio Expanse, and then, of course, the HiFiMan Susvara. All right, I used the balanced 4-pin XLR output for pretty much all of my listening. I figured that is how most people are going to use this amp. I think if you're spending money at this level, you're probably also spending money to make sure that you're using the balanced output of it more often than not. Okay, DACs. A little bit of run with my shit Bifrost 2/64. But most of the time, this was fed by my Berkeley Audio Designs Alpha Series 2 DAC, which is connected to a Singer SU2 USB bridge, which is connected to my computer via USB cable and then is connected to the Berkeley DAC via an AES connection. All right. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the sound. Now, one thing that really stands out about this amplifier sonically is how different it sounds with the different headphones that you plug into it. Like it becomes a very different product with a couple of these headphones, and I will unpack that in a minute. But everything that you're about to hear me say then needs to be held in the context that it really changes with the headphone that you plug into this thing. It is a bit pairing sensitive, more so than many of the other high-end head amps that I have either in-house right now or have tested lately, which I will link to a few below. Like I've had the Ferrum Ore and Hypso stack in recently. My personal high-end reference right now is the Vioelectric HPA V281. I have been loaned the iFi Pro iCan Signature. That's in. What else have I heard recently? Well, anyway, there's a few right there, and this one reacts to headphones in a bigger way than most of those others that I just named. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, sonically, what you're going to get across the board, though, because there are a few traits that are common to all of those different headphones, is that you're going to get a very clean and clear sound. There's a very low sonic background here that, in fact, I don't know that I ever heard the noise floor. So that's the background, and the noise floor is very low, very, very dark sonic background here, so that is not an issue. Okay. The other thing that it does is it is a big sound stager. All right, so for pretty much all of these headphones, it throws a bigger sound stage in all three dimensions. All three dimensions meaning width, height, and depth, okay, than just about any of those other amps that I just named most of the time. Now, the extent to which it does that does change with the headphone type, and we'll get to that again in just a moment. But soundstage size is, if you like big soundstage, then this is an amp that you should check out because it does throw a very large soundstage. Now, more often than not, the overall sound signature here from a frequency response standpoint is a little bit bright. This amp does tend to emphasize the upper frequencies, the treble and all of that, and de-emphasize the low end to an extent. Now, that high frequency emphasis is done with great control. Despite the fact that there's a little bit more apparent treble energy to the sound on most of the headphones that I named, we'll get to some exceptions in a minute, but on most of those headphones that I just named, the treble is very well controlled and almost never goes sibilant or sharp unless the recording is just really terrible and sibilant and sharp. Okay, so that it brings the level and the treble presence that it does, but still keeps it very well controlled, is impressive in its own way. The bass, though, like, I don't want you to think that it is devoid of low end. It has some rumble, it has a little bit of physicality and slam in the low end and all of that, but it is not the emphasis or the strength of this amplifier. Okay, so if you are a bass head and you need like present, slammy, thunderous, rumbling bass, this may not be the amp for you either, okay? With a couple of exceptions again, which we will get to in just a moment. All right, the resolution can also be excellent, but I think I also found like the resolution to vary a bit with what it was paired to. So because of that, we'll use that as the segue to talk about some of the pairings that I have here and like how that influences the sound on this amplifier and how that changes the listener experience again, in my opinion, into my ears. Let's start with the good. I thought really, really strong pairings here that sounded really good were the Fostex TH900 with the Lawton Purple Heart chambers that I have on it there. Like the Fostex TH900 series is widely known for being very, very amp picky, right? And this is like, and so this is a pretty good pairing I found, and that surprised me a little bit because of the somewhat brighter signature here. I thought that that would be a bad match for Fostex because those can be very hot in the treble sometimes. But no, this actually reined in the treble a little bit, which is a little bit different than what this does for most headphones. So again, pairing sensitivity here. Okay, it reined in the treble. It actually helped the tonal balance on that headphone through the mids a little bit. And it still maintained a lot of the physicality in the low end that Phonitor X is known for. Now, it is not the punchiest, slammiest, rumbliest I have ever heard the Phonitor X get, okay, but it's still very good and doesn't decrease it to the point where it's like no longer Phonitor Xian, so to speak. So that's still up there. So that was a very good pairing. The other one that really jumped out at me as being really strong was the HD6XX. I put that on, and it's first staged bigger than I've ever heard that headphone, and also filled in, like you hear sometimes about the 3 blob imaging of the 6XX or the HD650, sometimes even the HD600. This amp helped fill in left, center, and left, right a little bit and create a more coherent soundstage across the entire thing there on the 6XX. And then the bass was really full and slammy. Okay, lots of physicality on the bass there from the 6XX. A couple of other decent, but I mean, maybe not the best pairings, kind of a mixed bag pairing, would be the 2 Hi-Fi Min HE1000s, actually, both the V2 and the SE. Those are already big sound stagers on their own, but this amp took their soundstage and just made it much bigger than most of the other amps that I have on hand. It just sounds amazingly huge and expansive from this amp, but it doesn't sound exaggerated in the way that it does that either, because everything expands proportionally. So it keeps getting bigger in all 3 dimensions. So nothing ever seems stretched or out of place. And the sonic images, like in the imaging and the separation, like where things are and where things aren't, like those spaces grow proportionally with the soundstage, with the size of the soundstage, so that it never feels forced or unnatural in that really kind of extreme soundstage size that's coming through on those 2 headphones. With those 2 headphones in particular, you also really hear a lot of resolution come through. So this can be a very resolving amplifier, pulling out lots of fine, subtle details that were not showing up in, say, the V281 or on the Ferrum or in Hypso stack. With those 2 headphones in particular, okay, it was resolving those kinds of things well and bringing out texturing and that sort of thing to a degree that I haven't heard very often from those 2, or at least not with those other models that I just named. The downside, though, again, I said it's kind of a mixed bag with these HE1000s, is that here you can really hear the overall brightness of the signature. Still excellently controlled and rarely ever sibilant or sharp treble, but just a lot of it. Kind of an enhanced treble shelf, if you will, for some already kind of treble shelfy headphones with those hex, right? The low end is leaned out a little bit in comparison. So you lose some slam, you lose some rumble and all of that. Now there's still good bass definition, good bass resolution, good bass texturing. Just the quantity and the punch isn't there that it is on some amps. So pick your poison there. Like, I mean, is that a trade-off that's worth it to you? That's for you to answer. Okay. The hard-to-drive headphones, the Expanse and the Susvara, had similar effects on that, but not to the extent that I would hear over my V281 or the Ferrum or Hypso stack that had in, or the i-Fi that I haven't listened to the i-Fi much, but it just the brief time that I had it, like, didn't stand out in that way with those headphones either. But still, they sound pretty good overall. All right. One pairing that I just really didn't like was the DT880. For whatever reason, and I don't know if that's because it's 600 ohm or what, but this one just, it sounded a little bit dull. Didn't have the dynamics that headphone often does, and honestly didn't sound as resolving to me as it did from the Vio V281. So even though this thing is rated for massive power output, again, 8 watts per channel at 600 ohms, like that DT880 I did not think paired particularly well with this amp. And I've heard it better from the DT880 with lesser expensive amps than this one. Okay. So that's a lot of pairing things there going on. Like I mentioned the ZMF Atrium, and I said in the Atrium review, the Atrium is a bit of a stubborn headphone. It just kind of is what it is on a lot of different amps, turns out. And that came out here too. Like the soundstage gets a little bit bigger on the Atrium than on the other amps, but not nearly to the extent as like the Hex do, the HE1000s do, for example. The Focal Radiance, I preferred it slightly on the V281 and some of the others, but it was close enough that I probably wouldn't have noticed a difference if I wasn't directly A-Bing and was just listening to it on this. I'd probably still mostly enjoy it. All right. So then let's just also talk about some comparisons then about this amp and some of the others that I have in there here. And again, the Phonitor X here, it changes its behavior more than any of the other amps that I just named going from headphone to headphone. So I think you do need to be careful what you pair with this thing for best results to a greater extent than several of the other amps that kind of exist in this price range. Now, it is true with pretty much any headphone amp and all of that, that if you want the best experience possible, you have to be careful with headphone pairings and DAC pairings and all of that sort of thing. This one just more so. Okay, to my ear and this wide variety of headphones that I've described here, that's what I've noticed. Okay, general trends though, and I talked about this in my Ferrum Aura and Hypsos review, so I'll just restate it here briefly. General trends, the Phonitor X tends to be slightly more resolving to my ear than the V281 or the Ferrum stack. It has a bigger soundstage with more headphones than either of those two as well in all three dimensions. Okay. However, it does not bring the dynamics or the physicality, particularly in the low end, that those other two do. Like, it is significantly behind those other two in those particular traits. And then the resolution, again, like, because of the big change, like that complete order there, like the DT880, for example, I would rank this behind all those others in just about every way, honestly. Like, it's just weird how that one doesn't work out so well to my ear with this. Okay, so those are some comparisons. So overall, like it's hard for me to give a ringing endorsement, generally speaking, of this amplifier because it is so pairing picky. But if you're looking for an amp in this range, you have a Fostex TH900 in your collection, you're not a bass head, and you have like one of the Hi-Fiman HE1000s, for example, and you are just a fan of huge soundstage. One more thing I want to add before I go, that is, like, you would think that with the huge soundstage with the Hex that it would just sound completely epic. Because of the somewhat thin bass, or lean bass I should say, and the lack of physicality and slam that comes with that, like, this thing to my ears hints at being huge and epic and tremendous and just vast and all of that, but doesn't have that extra feeling. Like, you don't feel it in the way that you can with other amps like the V281 that can really bring the rumble when they need to. So that's another thing that I'll add there. But with that out of the way, again, Fostex TH900 series I think is going to pair pretty well with this. If you're okay with huge staging but a little bit leaner bass and a brighter presentation, the Hi-Fiman HE1000 sounded really good with this. So you can get really excellent results. So if this has a headphone that it pairs well with, which you could say about any amp really, you should put it on your list to audition. If you like more bass and more bass impact generally, or you don't have any of those headphones that I mentioned, you probably want to look elsewhere. All right, I am Wave Theory. Thanks for watching. This has been my review of the SPL Phonitor X headphone amp. Please remember to like if you have not done that, subscribe if you have not done that, check out my PayPal where you can make a one-time donation to help me continue to do this, or check out my Patreon where you can subscribe monthly and get some cool benefits. Links in the description below. All right, thanks again for watching. I am Wave Theory. Enjoy the music.